First things first, let's talk about price. The MDX is obviously quite a bit more money than the Honda Pilot. On the lowest trim levels, you're looking at essentially $10,000 delta. When you fully load these two cars, our Honda Pilot Elite is just over $50,000, where this MDX A-Spec Advanced, a new trim level for 2025, is just under $70,000. There is an enormous price delta between both vehicles. When it comes to styling, I'll leave that up to you. I will argue the Pilot looks rather truckish, and they're trying to get the MDX to look fairly upscale. It is a good-looking SUV in both cases. The interior dimensions, though, not surprisingly, are essentially identical. Both vehicles share the same wheelbase, and the overall length of both SUVs is within 2 to 3 inches, essentially the same. It's just styling differences that lead to the length difference. So when it comes to cargo capacity, with a third row up, both vehicles have just over 18 cubic feet of cargo capacity. With a third row down, you're looking at just under 48 cubic feet or just under 49 cubic feet of cargo capacity. And with the second row down, they are essentially identical. The way you operate the seats as well when it comes to usability up and down, the same. Honda and Acura have not screwed up functionality of their SUVs, so all the controls are physical and easy to use. So if you need to get things in and out of the SUV, put in a kid, fold seats down, you're not screwing around with motorized controls. This is a very welcome change in a usable 3-row SUV. The Honda Pilot has taken the minivan approach. Essentially, you have a tiered storage nook in the doors, the center console area. They've given up style for functionality. In the case of the MDX, well, you have a much prettier center console and much better looking doors. It's less usable. I'm just going to be entirely honest. When it comes to interior noise levels, though, that's where you're going to notice a giant difference between both vehicles. There is a noticeably lower amount of NVH that makes its way into the MDX. It's definitely where you feel your money being spent. That also translates over to the audio system. Any way you cut it, the Acura audio system, both in their low-trim vehicles or in this high-trimmed 3D Bang & Olufsen, vastly perform better than the Bose or the base audio system found in the Honda Pilot. Another place where you notice money is the seats as well. While I will argue the Honda Pilot seats for a non-premium SUV are excellent, the Acura MDXs are a step above. And when you move to this A-Spec Advance with the massaging seats and there are various other adjustments, they are an excellent non-ultra luxury SUV seat. They are very, very comfortable. General switchgear feels largely similar. The safety suite between both vehicles is essentially identical. However, the software for the infotainment is a little different. While both vehicles use physical controls for everything, thankfully, the Acura MDX has the latest Google touchscreen. They've got rid of the touchpad, thankfully, and it is faster to use. Though honestly, in the real world, in both vehicles' cases, you're just going to be using Android Auto or Apple CarPlay. And in both vehicles' cases, they work pretty well. So with that, let's head in the shop and put both of these cars up on the lift. In the shop with the Acura MDX and Honda Pilot. Both of these vehicles, for obvious reasons, are remarkably similar as they both share the comically named Acura Honda light truck platform. But in this shop segment, I'm going to do my best to walk you through where they are different, where both vehicles have their inherent pros and cons. As starting, there's nearly a $10,000 delta between a base MDX and a base Honda Pilot. Let's start with the 2025 Acura MDX, which just received its mid-cycle refresh. Both of these vehicles are in the same 113.8-inch wheelbase. However, there are some key differences starting with the MDX. The front suspension architecture is entirely unique for the MDX, as it's a double A-arm or double wishbone front end. It does not have passive dampers in the non-Type S MDXs. This A-Spec Advance uses a passive shock. However, the advantage of the double wishbone suspension is slightly better ride compliance on the front and negative camber gain in the front and hard cornering. It also has a VGRS or variable gear ratio steering rack, just like in the Honda Pilot, to make the front end feel pretty quick. The rear suspension is a multi-link, just like in the Honda Pilot. However, the packaging of the rear is a little different, so they are not the same or identical rear end. And when you get both vehicles with all-wheel drive, they both share essentially the same rear differentials. In fact, the identical differential. However, there's some key tuning differences. SH all-wheel drive is a true mechanical all-wheel drive setup. A torque vector is in the back. It will send 100% of the available torque in the rear to either the left or right outside tire, depending on cornering situations. It does very, very well. It helps essentially yaw this vehicle in and out of corners, making it feel more nimble than it really is. It also helps greatly in snow conditions. The MDX gets the same electronic brake booster, but it does get a dramatically different drivetrain. The MDX gets a single overhead cam J-Series V6, which has VTEC. In the MDX case, it makes about 290 horsepower. It gets about 19 miles per gallon combined. And it gets the identical 10-speed automatic gearbox, obviously with different calibration tuning. The Pilot, on the other hand, this is a 2024 Pilot Elite or long-termer, gets strut front, primarily for cost, and a different packaged rear suspension for some of the rear cargo packaging. Just like in the Acura MDX, this Honda Pilot gets passive dampers. For this generation Pilot, just like in the MDX, they focused on reducing NVH by dramatically increasing body rigidity. The Pilot gets less sound deadening material than the MDX. For 2025, has reduced sound or NVH by 10% versus the outgoing MDX. The Pilot is just a noisier vehicle, as you've heard in our interior segment. It gets, however, their new V6. This is their dual overhead cam V6, which does not get VTEC. It makes 285 horsepower on regular fuel. The MDX, to get 290 horses, requires premium. And I'm assuming when you run regular, you get about 280, just like the outgoing Pilot. So there's a discrepancy there. Both vehicles get the same tow rating as well. With all-wheel drive, both of these vehicles tow up to 5,000 pounds. They both, again, get the same or similar 10-speed automatic with unique calibration. The one thing I will bring up for this test, as you're going to notice on our driving loop, and as we've already talked about from our sound and NVH testing, is both vehicles are on the Bridgestone Alenza AS Sport, or all-season sport tire. This is Bridgestone's sort of workhorse SUV tire. It's on a lot of vehicles as factory, like in the case of both of these, and it's meant to do everything. It does not have peak snow performance. If you're looking to do a lot of snow driving, like we talked about in the past, get a dedicated snow tire, but this does a little bit of everything. It focuses on long life and low NVH. This is a good tire. We've used it in a lot of vehicles that we've personally owned. And if you want to go up market, you can get the Alenza Ultra, which further reduces some of that NVH. And it's a very good tire. As we've talked about in the past, in December, my plan is to release a essentially buyer's guide to tires. We're going to be walking you through, with the help of Bridgestone, some of the engineering that goes into tires and how each category of tire is different. Construction, basic principles, and of course, why they drive the way they do. So let's go take both the MDX and the Honda Pilot for a quick drive. Pilote time, Mark. Dual overhead cam this time. Non-VTEC J-Series, Mark. Trying to experience some braking. Oh, yeah.
Those lenses are really hooking up to the road, Jack.
Oh.
So let's talk about this. First off, I'm wearing a Z06 hat because I lost a bet. I thought that the Nissan Kicks video that we did would outperform our Z06 or ZR1 video, and I lost. So if you want to get me off this hat, watch that Kicks video. Second thing, Jack is driving this thing like an absolute monkey.
Well, this is going to be one of the last times I get to drive the Honda Pilot Elite before this goes back, because not only is this a comparison test video, this is a goodbye to our long-term Honda Pilot video. You've lived with this thing now for 13,000 miles. How does this vehicle drive in its class of non-premium SUVs? How does it compare to its bigger brother, the Acura MDX, Mark?
Okay, so I spent a year in the MDX and I spent a year in this. Granted,
Yes.
It was a Type S, but I mean, there's a lot of similarities. There's a couple things you notice about the Pilot. Let's start there. The Pilot is definitely... Oh, those lenses just
incredible.
They pulled up the pavement or something.
Yeah, you were saying? Sorry.
I think it just goes to show this in its class is definitely the most dynamic in terms of driving. for its price point.
Yeah, that or maybe like a CX-90.
Yeah, I don't even think the CX-90 is as good as this. CX-90 lacks the sharpness this does, even though it's on a softer suspension and a softer tire. It does the handling thing, the turn-in thing, really well without, the torque vector and rear differential in this car really gets it around the corners. But what it does great is the body control's good too on top of it. It doesn't make the car stiff, but still makes it feel nimble. That's really hard to do.
Yes.
To find that balance without adaptive dampers. And the CX-90 struggles with that. It's too rough over this type of pavement, whereas it soaks it up and you still feel like you can drive it.
Well, we crowned this thing the king of its class last year. We gave it, best full-size SUV of the year, and it won its comparison test because it does everything very, very well.
Yeah. Its negatives are the transmission tuning, which I talked about in the last video, unfortunately, is far more jerky than the MDX is. And it's jerky in the real world stuff. It's not like what you're doing right now. When your foot's to the floor, it's whatever. Nobody does that.
No.
So I'm going to have you, when you get into a straight here, I'm just going to have you come to a stop. All right. And I'm going to have you take off sport.
I put it back into normal as well.
All right, just come to a stop, and I want you to pretend that in the back seat is a plastic bottle of your Dimitri's vodka, and you do not want to spill it. So I want you to launch very carefully. All right, come to a stop again. We're going to do it twice. All right, now just go quickly, but okay. It's jerky. It's really hard. The throttle mapping on here is too aggressive. So if you need to get off the line smoothly, there's always a jerk. And then
so if you have a kid in the back or something, it's going to be a real problem.
Along with the start-stop system, like if you're off the line when the light changes, you get the jerk from the start-stop, you get the jerk from the throttle mapping. So that's one thing that this car is definitely needs some work on. And then the other thing is it's jerky off throttle. You'll notice if you're on the highway or, just kind of like cruising around, off throttle, there's always like that disengagement part. There's always this head,
just hold it down.
And it's definitely, this is where it's driven me more, not nuts, but I've noticed it more that I drove it. And you notice it way more after you drive the MDX, which the throttle mapping's better on that.
Because these technically have the same gearbox.
Yeah.
More or less.
Right. And I don't know, obviously we don't work internally to know how they calibrate. I'm sure all that's done in Japan. But yeah, this car definitely needs those improvements. Clearly they need to separate the two vehicles. But let's talk about the other stuff. So throttle mapping, the braking system, Jack. And I know you noticed this on a longer trip.
The brakes in this vehicle are not ideal.
Yeah.
I definitely feel that when you fully load this car, when I mean fully load, like I use this thing to move. And when this thing is loaded up, which is the equivalent of you putting everyone in this vehicle, like operating every one of the rows, full family in it, the brakes feel undersized for the amount of mass that this thing can carry.
Yeah, and the pedal's very soft.
Yes.
I think it's weird, and I know I said this in the other video, it's not like a traditional Honda pedal where it's very firm. The pedal is soft and progressive, which is good, right? Unlike the throttle pedal, which is a little bit too sensitive. Yeah, now the brake is too soft, and the more load you get into it, you come to a stop and you're like, is this thing going to stop? You're really having to get deep in the pedal, and I think that's the one confidence area that I think is going to hurt people driving this. And you'll notice that the more miles you put on as the pads wear down, could be fluid too.
The safety suite though in this car, as a balance, is quite good.
Yeah, it is.
Lane keep assist works very, very well. So for on longer drives, if you want to lean on it, not a problem. The adaptive cruise control also works fairly well. Fuel economy, you have put a lot of miles on this thing, and I will say it does return better fuel economy than the MDX.
Yes.
In the MDX, we've been putting in regular fuel, not 93.
I put premium.
You put premium in it. So I put regular in it, which it will run on.
Yeah.
I got about 18-ish on the highway. Okay. With premium in it, we're getting 17.9, but it is colder.
Yeah, true.
And
that's way colder.
Well over 1,000 miles of driving. Yeah. This is getting closer to 20.
Yeah, and I mean it adds up.
And it's combined.
Right, it adds up definitely. If you're a family and you're buying this and that's what you're using it for as a hauler, it's a consideration. I think that's the one thing you have to know going into both of these vehicles is don't expect good fuel economy, which given
you're trading a V6 versus a 4-popper for bad fuel economy, basically.
So I think, we talked about it briefly, the pros and the cons of the interior, the driving character of this, but again, it's to get back to the pros of why you would buy this. There's not really another vehicle in this class that combines the ride quality and the confidence in driving and a naturally aspirated V6, which, now has become more questionable, but you know, this is a great blend of everything you want as a family vehicle with really good residuals. It doesn't look horrible. I don't know, Jack, what's your
My
takeaway?
take, the thing that I like about this thing, I know you like the V6. What I like about it, and what I think Honda's done exceptionally well with this class of vehicles, despite not having any fancy pants dampers, they've separated the lateral and the vertical ride very, very well. When talking to the Honda engineers on a original video, they made sure there was a lot of lateral stiffness, so side-to-side stiffness, so they can make the car soft up and down. So it still goes left and right quite well, but over bad bumps, what you really care about is it handles well, and I think it's one of the best in its class. It does not feel like most of the things, like a Palisade or a Telluride or Grand Highlander. This does not feel like a penalty box to roll around in, and I think that's despite it having struts in the front versus the double wishbone in the MDX.
On the regular road surfaces,
Yes.
you don't notice it that much that it's strut. That's how good of a job they did. Yes, it doesn't have the wow factor of some of the newer SUVs. This is far more conservative in styling, interior and out, and the way that it looks. You know, it doesn't have the CX-90 like beauty. It doesn't have the Palisade interior. It doesn't have the Grand Highlander space or Highlander like kind of look and feel, and infotainment, more importantly. You know, this is not going to blow you away, but I think it's what I like is that it's just functional where it needs to be.
As a tool.
Yes.
All right, Mark, let's head in the MDX, sir. As I crash into a bar.
Don't worry about it. You're just going to sit here all day, or
Yeah,
what?
we're in an MDX A-Spec, Mark. Show me what VTEC feels like. Last 500 RPM.
Holy Christ, did that pedal go to the floor? Oh my gosh. Oh! Well,
I went flying out of my seat. I will say, I know technically the new dual overhead cam engine is better, theoretically, than this single overhead cam VTEC motor, but this has a lot more character. I'm also going to get this off the bat, Mark.
Dude, I can't tell the difference.
You can't tell the difference?
Barely. I mean,
I did like a 1,000-mile road trip in this thing.
yeah, I think it's barely noticeable.
It's
To
the
an
last
average,
500 RPM, Mark.
to the average person, you're not going to tell.
VTEC, Mark. VTEC.
Anyway, I mean, they're both really smooth V6s.
Yacht rock levels of smooth.
Yes. Let's talk
Michael
about...
McDonald and backing vocals smooth, Mark.
Yeah, this is what I get now. I got to hear about Michael McDonald again for the next 10 years.
You owe it to yourself. Once we're done, go watch the Yacht Rock documentary, Mark. You're going to learn about smooth grooves on HBO.
I already know about smooth grooves enough. I'm driving the MDX
All right.
A-Spec. So, okay. We drove the Pilot. Now this is back-to-back. What are the things that you notice right away? The critical things, because you said this is $10,000 more
Technically,
plus.
in this vehicle's case, it's like $14,000 more than your Elite. You notice it is much quieter.
Yes.
As you've proven in testing, it is much quieter. It has more compliance. When you go around corners, while the Pilot is quite good, this is far more nimble. The front end does a better job getting in and out of corners, and that double wishbone suspension also helps with ride compliance. Maybe it's 10%, 5% softer. It isn't like a life-changing difference, but you combine that with a much better feeling front end and a better calibrated automatic gearbox. It is a better driving vehicle.
Yeah, it is noticeably better to drive. I think, it takes the performance of the Pilot, which is on the softer side, and this keeps the softness, but the body control's better here. It doesn't seem to want to float around as much, and the steering is definitely quicker, instantaneously quicker. It's easier to get in the corners, to turn in, and to your point, this is where the double wishbone front really, you notice it a lot in driving. The front end is far more stable. It's far less floaty. You don't have like so much of a pogo effect over bumps in a corner. And, you know, again, I know we're talking about this with the idea that you're buying a 3-row SUV. Nobody's driving it like this. But it's these subtle nuances between the two are the reason why you would buy this over that. If you had luxury car money, I thought about this, like, is it really worth 15 grand? And where it's worth 15 grand, to me, is one, the seats are way better.
Yes.
The seats, if you're doing a lot of driving, it's way better. The other thing
particularly
is,
in this A-spec with the massaging function.
yes, it's so good. And then just little things like coming off the line is smoother. Just the transmission programming, you feel less G-load, G-shock, even in its upshifts when you're getting going. Like, they're all imperceptible. Whereas the Pilot was, okay, you kind of jerk off the line, and that second and third gear shift are like, this just smooths it out perfectly. And that's what you want, really, from an automatic gearbox of this era. So trans tuning, seats, body control, ride control, audio system is 25% better in here. Materials, the way it looks, if you park these next to each other and you said, which one do you want to buy, even despite this color, you're going to take the MDX. I mean, it just looks better, it feels better, it is a better car. So if you're looking at this from a luxury purchase...
If you're comparing these two.
Yes, if you're looking at these two, and I've been in this place where I'm like, I can get a commodity vehicle that does everything I want, but I want just that little bit more. I would say the price delta to me is worth more like 10 grand. 15 is a stretch.
I will say, though, I think given the price point that these vehicles exist in, the Pilot is the king of 3-row commodity SUVs. This is not the king of luxury SUVs.
Right, yeah.
So what I will say is if you are going to spend this much money on a luxury 2 or 3-row SUV, really, I think most people are going to use this as a 2-row. Right?
Yes, for sure.
To be completely clear, unlike the Pilot, I feel like most people buy MDX class size vehicles primarily use them as a 2-row. And if you can compare this against my beloved X5 or a slightly used X7 with the inline 6, the B58, or even a Q7, this does not do all the things those vehicles do as well. It may handle every bit as well as a Q7,
yeah,
but I think the overall ride compliance with the air, the fact that you're basically in air suspension, that price point in the Q7,
yeah,
or the X5 and X7, I think both dynamically do a better job than this vehicle does.
Well,
and they have a much better drivetrain.
Yeah, I think that's the thing where this loses out. It's caught in this hard middle ground of sharing a similar drivetrain to the Pilot. It can't compete in that regard. It can't compete in the road isolation. Now, they did make this quieter for 25, and you notice it, but you get out of a Q7 or an X5, and you're like, on no planet are they similar in body structure, feel. And you can't defeat the fact that the BMW is a rear-wheel drive architecture. The Q7 is a rear-wheel drive based all-wheel drive system in there.
Yes.
They just feel another price point up from the MDX. So for me, as much as I love the Type S, which does make a big difference with the air ride in there, when you go to this is best bought in that middle ground. Like, you want a Pilot, but you want something a little bit better to drive, and this definitely does that.
You get an MDX not as an A-spec with all the massaging stuff. You get an MDX, near the lower trim levels, where you're more like in the 50s or very, very low 60s. That's where the value of this vehicle exists. Because of that price point, it is cheaper than the Germans.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it really does drive well. I mean, what this is able to do for front wheel drive with the torque vectoring pack, it's really good. Yeah. It's really good. I mean, and it's fun to drive too because the front works so well. And we're on the same tires again as the Pilot was, where that front end felt like it wanted to give up. There's just so much going on.
The dynamic camber in the front makes a huge difference with double wishbones.
Yeah, and you notice it back to back the most. But again, you're making a great point. It's the price complaint. When you go to a luxury vehicle, unless you have some actual raging passion for an Acura product, I feel like most people are going to drive this and they're going to go to the BMW and Q7. It's really hard here. I like it, but I don't know if in a luxury product I would choose this despite the way it drives and some of its features.
Before you get into final thoughts, because I'll have you wrap up your time in the Pilot and the MDX, my 2 cents are, for the money, if it's going to be used as a commodity box, most people, to me, when they're buying an SUV, if they're being honest with themselves, they care about, is it a good utility vehicle? Can I put all my shit in it?
Yeah.
Am I going to be comfortable in a straight line? And how much is this going to cost me over my, whatever your ownership period is, 3, 5, 10 years? I think you are getting, while it is objectively worse to drive in every aspect, you are getting more vehicle for your money in the Pilot.
Yeah,
And,
I would agree with that. I think, you know, for what you really want to use this for, granted, there are some benefits of getting the luxury features here on a longer drive, mainly in the seats. The seats are a big deal to me in this. But other than that, I mean, the Pilot does deliver on every single thing you want as a family vehicle, and its usability is better than this in the front half of the cabin. It's a big difference.
Yep. All right, Mark, so with that, let's head into the final thoughts, sir.
All right. Final thoughts on the MDX and Honda Pilot. I've spent almost 2 years with these vehicles. I feel like I know them in and out. And a big thanks to Lynn, Jake, and Andrew at Honda for making this happen and helping us with the technical resources. So I'm going to start with the Honda Pilot. The pros are, this thing is just, it's like a family dog. You know, it's with you every day. It performs everything it needs to do. It's what you see is what you get. There's nothing frustrating about its usability. Everything works. It is comfortable, it rides well, it's got a good audio system on the upper trim level, and you know, you don't fight it. It just works, and the running costs are extremely low. The negative part is it lacks a lot of character, and the more time I spent with it, the more time I wanted to be back in the MDX, not only from exterior styling, but interior flair. The current generation Pilot, as good as it is as that appliance, it lacks, you know, kind of like the new Accord. They're so focused on that it needs to be tarted up just a bit to feel like a more special space, and that's why it would push me into the MDX. The other thing about the Pilot is the transmission programming needs work, definitely. I think the front end is a little bit soft and pogoey sometimes, but I don't think most people are going to notice it. I think it's at the 90th percentile in ride and handling for what they can do, and it's super stable in every condition. You know, like, it is really, really good ride and handling wise. So the cons are, of course, transmission and fuel economy. I've said it before, and I think, you know, maybe if they can quiet it down a bit on the interior space as well, I think that would go a long way. The MDX has so many different spreads of trim levels. The Type S is incredible. The Air Ride, again, suspension, tuning, ride and handling, and pretty much good isolation for the price point. The way that the two are so different, you can justify the price just in the double wishbone suspension in the front of the MDX. And this is a textbook case. If you want to do a case study on the difference between these two platforms with different suspension in the front, the MDX is like night and day. The front like turns in, grips, it doesn't plow, it doesn't pogo, it's got so much grip in the front, it's so quick to turn in and rotate. It feels less front wheel drive, it feels almost rear wheel drive, and that's amazing that it can do that. That's where it really separates itself. The drivetrains are so nominally close that I think that's the disappointing part about the MDX. It doesn't separate it enough. But, you know, again, when you're just cruising on the highway, the seats, the quietness, the audio system, the massage function is tremendous. And some of those somewhat luxury features are great. And the fact that both vehicles have most of their setup in the physical controls, not everything's in the touchscreen, is why people are really gonna love this. It just matters how much money you have and what you value. But I hope you took away a lot from these series, and I appreciate your time. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next video.